Alright, welcome everyone. Today we're going to talk about Crick, son of Yawgmoth. This is a mono-black cEDH deck built to win fast, usually turns 1 through 4. And I'm going to break down the game plan, the key packages, and our main combo lines. So I'm just going to pull out my non-altered Crick here to talk through the characteristics of Crick himself. So Crick costs 4 generic and 3 Phyrexian black. He has lifelink, and the most important line of text on Crick is for every black mana symbol and a cost, you can pay 2 life instead. That means that this deck is basically cheating on mana constantly whenever Crick is in play. We're converting life into mana advantage, and then turning that mana into tutors, tutoring the deck several times to assemble a single clean sequence that ends the game. It can end as early as turn 1 with this deck. It's a little bit harder now that Jeweled Lotus and Mana Crypt aren't around, but it still happens. Turn 1 wins. And then also we're trying to win really no later than turn 4. Crick also gets bigger as you play. Whenever you cast a black spell, you put a +1/+1 counter on him. That's not the main plan, but it matters because his lifelink can stabilize you whenever you swing. And sometimes Crick himself can even become a real threat to players because of commander damage. So now we're going to talk through landing Crick early. So that's our first goal, is get Crick out there, and then we're going to convert that into a win attempt immediately. This list is packed with a ton of burst mana. So it starts with lands that either tap for more than 1, or convert into a burst turn like Lake of the Dead or even Peat Bog. Peat Bog is a pretty good land to put out there immediately because it enters tapped. But immediately following that, you get a nice burst of 2 black mana, which in combination with everything else can really swing things. We got the fast mana rocks like Soul Ring, Mana Vault, Grim Monolith. And then we have other support pieces for that, being like Jeweled Amulet, Jet Medallion, the Moxes, Lotus Petal, Lion's Eye Diamond can be crucial in the middle of like resolving a tutor to get you an additional burst to immediately play what you're tutoring for. Oftentimes that's like final parting. We also run the keys. The keys synergize extremely well with like Soul Ring, Mana Vault, and Grim Monolith. They give you something else to search for off of your Urza Saga if you've already have like Soul Ring or Mana Vault out, which is really good. The target creature can't be blocked this turn on Manifold Key comes up at times whenever you really do care about that lifelink. After that, we've got rituals, Dark Ritual, Cabal Ritual, Rain of Filth, and even Blood Pet. Blood Pet itself is a ritual because oftentimes we only care about the generic cost of spells. So 2 life to cast Blood Pet, immediately sacrificing him for black mana is really just like a 1 mana ritual. Also, we run Calling the Weak and Sacrifice to also get large bursts in mana because oftentimes we're cheating these creatures into play, or in the case of Calling the Weak, we can play like a super cheap creature, or even use like our token army from Orcish Bowmasters and then create, quick 4 black mana. One thing to highlight about this list is the tutor density. We run a lot of tutors, and that changes how the deck mulligans. You're not looking for one perfect opening hand. You're looking for a hand that can turn into a win attempt as long as you see mana and 1 or 2 ways to find what you need. We don't rely on grind engines really to keep up long term. This is like a pure gas, no breaks, and really it's because the tutor density is just so high. A huge percentage of your top decks really just stay live because of that, and it's very normal for this deck to attempt a win, get stopped, and then have enough gas to attempt again because of how many tutors we have. So we're a little light on interaction because we are higher on tutors. If we need to deal with something on the board, more often than not, we either tutor for the answer or we push through. And in many games, the problem creatures aren't around early enough for us to really care. So Drannith Magistrate is really the biggest one that can matter, but it's not really around as often as people really think. And our rule is simple on our removal. If it doesn't remove Drannith before we can cast Crick, we don't play it. So no Deadly Rollick. Instead, we're on Dismember. 1 mana, 4 life, kills Drannith. Snuff Out. If we just got a swamp, it's online. And then really it's just like Tiling Gates. Phasing it out often is just good enough because on that turn, we're usually trying to win. The cards that really can stand out in this list are Cruel Claw's Heist and Word of Command. Most of the time, these are about removing free counterspells that an opponent's holding. Think the floor of these cards really as Thoughtseize, but the ceilings are really much higher. Word of Command can be extremely disruptive. It can let you take a crucial sorcery your opponent has in hand and put it on the stack at a time where normally only an instant can be played. And really, honestly, the better you are at politicking, reading the table, and deducing what people have, the better Word of Command really gets. Cruel Claw's Heist, it can remove a counterspell from your opponent, but it can also give you access to one, and even if no counters are present, it can still grab something worthwhile. More often than not, you do gift the player a card that you are also targeting. Okay, so the first line that we're going to go through is really just like a simple Hoarding Broodlord line. This is like the most straightforward version of this line. And the majority of your earliest win attempts with this deck are going to probably be through Hoarding Broodlord once you have Crick online. So some of the most common setups are going to be like your classic Entomb and Reanimate. But you also have this card Final Parting, which would put Hoarding Broodlord directly into the graveyard and Reanimate directly into your hand by itself, which lets you get started right there. So if we have Crick and Hoarding Broodlord in play through one of these methods, Hoarding Broodlord will enter and exile a card. Typically, and this is no surprise to anyone, we're going to find Saw in Half. But what's unique about Crick's interaction because of Saw in Half is we don't need any other additional mana at this point. Because we can convoke these, with both Crick and Hoarding Broodlord and pay the 2 life on the black pip to cast Saw in Half, targeting Hoarding Broodlord. And, whenever this resolves, we'll get 2 Hoarding Broodlord tokens. And, the most straightforward thing you can do is go get the classic Peer into the Abyss and Sacrifice. Convoke, cast, sacrifice, adding 8 black mana. And what's also really nice about this is because you can convoke and spend 3 of that black mana, you'll still have 5 floating black mana because you'll pay the 6 life on the Peer into the Abyss, and burst draw your deck with 5 floating mana. But here's really the key point with that. Peer into the Abyss itself does not inherently win the game. It's rare that you can't win the game after drawing half your deck, but you still have to assemble that finish, and it would feel extremely bad if somebody was waiting and holding on to a Deflecting Swat or an Orcish Bowmasters or a number of things that can just really just interact with Peer into the Abyss and stop you. And Hoarding Broodlord lines are really the most fragile in the deck. So I wouldn't really recommend going for Peer into the Abyss here. Truthfully, I like instead after our sacrifice. The other card we find is Yawgmoth's Will. So if we did Entomb Reanimate, right, these are also in our graveyard. So if we convoke cast a Yawgmoth's Will, we'll still have 6 floating black mana, and now we can start recasting these. So we can start recasting this Reanimate, bring back this Hoarding Broodlord. We can recast this Saw in Half, targeting importantly the Hoarding Broodlord token, because you can't destroy Hoarding Broodlord under a Yawgmoth's Will effect. It'll go to exile instead. But you can still destroy tokens, which will give us 2 more Hoarding Broodlord ETBs. So off of the reanimated Hoarding Broodlord and these 2 more ETBs, typically what I like to find here is going to be Aetherflux, Bolas of Citadel, and Sensei's Divining Top. We can immediately recast our sacrifice, sacrificing one of these tokens, making 8 more black mana, which will give us plenty to cast in order. Aether Flux, then Sensei's, gaining a bunch of life, and then Bolas' Citadel, gaining a bunch of life. And then from this point, we're just going through this Bolas' Citadel, Sensei's Divining Top loop of putting this on top of the library, paying 1 life to cast it, gaining life, putting this back on top. And then if you do this about 16 times, you'll gain more than enough life to be able to kill the table. Typically, I like to go a little over. That way, if somebody puts anything relevant on the stack, I can just pay 50 more life and kill them immediately. This is one way how a Hoarding Broodlord line can go directly into like a winning line. Another could be through Fleshwrither after the sacrifice instead of a Yawgmoth's Will. And then we start the transfiguring, and I'll show you how to win with Fleshwrither shortly after this. Now, the sort of bread and butter of this Crick deck is going to be like a Necrotic Ooze sort of pile. Alright, so next up is like the Newsmodius combo. Necrotic Ooze plus Asmodeus plus Scourge Familiar. And in this list, this is one of the cleanest pivots to win without needing to cast a bunch of extra spells. Buried Alive, sets this up super easily. You'll put Necrotic Ooze, Scourge Familiar, and Asmodeus directly into your graveyard. Your graveyard order matters a lot, so typically I like to always ensure that Necrotic Ooze is going to be the topmost creature in my graveyard here. In case we're using something like a Shallow Grave Effector, be reanimating him. But from there, we can put Dance of the Dead onto the stack, reanimating Necrotic Ooze. I'm just using Dance of the Dead here as an example. It could honestly be any number of reanimation spells. But yeah, now we have Necrotic Ooze into play with Crick. And if our hand is empty, we can just use Asmodeus' activated ability, pay 6 life, because it's 3 black pips, draw 7 cards. So, we draw 7. From here, we can just discard 3 through Scourge Familiar's activated ability, choose and discard a card, add black mana. So we got 3 black mana to just keep going through, drawing 7 more. And eventually, we're going to draw into a Chainer, a Razaketh, and a Grey Merchant of Asphodel. So whenever we draw into these, we're going to want them in the discard because Necrotic Ooze now will have Chainer and Razaketh's ability. We just discarded 3 cards, so that's going to pay for Chainers. So pay 3 life, put Grey Merchant of Asphodel right into play. And, we'll drain the table. In this case, we'll drain the table for 8, and we'll gain 24. Then we'll pay 2 life, sacrifice Gary. Tutor a card, it doesn't really matter. But then you can pay 9 life through Chainer, put Gary back into play, and just keep doing this until the table's dead. One thing that's really nice about this, because it's all activated abilities, all instant speed, is it doesn't matter if your opponent has an Orcish Bowmasters. All of those triggers can just be on the stack, and you just keep responding to them and kill the table before they even have a chance to respond. Okay, so now we're going to go through the Fleshwrither line. This one is very real, but also very life intensive. So depending on how early you assemble it, you may need to distribute this across 2 turns. And, being able to swing with your life-linking Crick also can really help a lot with this line. But, going through this line, this is typically how you would do it. You're going to sacrifice or transfigure Fleshwrither once it's in play into a Necrotic Ooze. And then you're going to transfigure again Necrotic Ooze into a Balthor the Defiled. Now, usually here, if you don't have any floating mana that you're going to need to use for your next transfigure, this is a good time to swing in with Crick because he is a minion and Balthor does buff minions. But otherwise, you're just going to, activate Balthor, return Fleshwrither and Necrotic Ooze, and then transfigure Fleshwrither into a Violent Tumor. Now, this is where the lines can vary a little bit. Because if you already have Asmodeus in your hand, or you tutored it earlier or something like that, you're immediately just going to find Scourge Familiar here, because then you can just discard Asmodeus to Scourge Familiar, and then you have Newsmodius completely online and win through, my previous discussion on Newsmodius. But if you don't already have Asmodeus in hand, you're going to actually find a Razaketh here. Then you're going to pay 2 life, sacrifice Violent Tumor, and find Reanimate. Pay 2 life, Reanimate, Violent Tumor. And you can see now here how this is getting fairly life intensive. Off of this Violent Tumor ETB is where we're going to put Scourge Familiar. Then, again, Necrotic Ooze, activate Razaketh, sacrifice Violent Tumor, find Asmodeus, discard Asmodeus through Scourge Familiar, Asmodeus back online, continue to win as I've described before. Another way that this line can be altered is, let's go through to where we've done all of that again. Our first Violent Tumor. Let's say this time Scourge Familiar is stuck in our hand. Again, we're going to bin Razaketh, pay 2 life, sacrifice Violent Tumor, reanimate Violent Tumor, bin Asmodeus, and then pay 2 life, sacrifice Violent Tumor. And at this point, we're actually just going to find Lion's Eye Diamond, cast Lion's Eye Diamond, and then sacrificing Lion's Eye Diamond, making 3 black, discarding our hand, which is Scourge Familiar. We now have the 3 black mana needed to start activating Asmodeus. And, back again, we are in this Necrotic Ooze Asmodeus combo. So Fleshwrither is extremely versatile for this. Draw our deck, pivot our, game plan into that ability to finish with just, Grey Merchant, Chainer, Razaketh, shenanigans. Okay, so this next one is another independent win line if you have enough life. So if you have both Razaketh and Blood Celebrant in play, Blood Celebrant lets you convert life into the exact mana that you need, and Razaketh lets you tutor. So right now we're going to do a tutor chain, like Gary Recursion Loop, manually to drain the table. Our devotion, whenever Gary ETBs, will be 6, 8. So 24. We'll drain the table 8. So we're going to need to do it at least 5 times. Luckily, we play plenty of reanimation. So the way that this works is, on our first, we're going to generate enough mana to both cast Grey Merchant of Asphodel and a reanimation spell. So it depends on what's available to you. If you've already used Reanimate to put Razaketh in play, you're not going to be able to do this, but let's just assume that we actually hard cast Razaketh in this case, just to make it, easiest. So we'll pay 6 life to make 3 black mana, and then pay 2 life, sacrifice Blood Celebrant, get Grey Merchant of Asphodel. We'll cast Grey Merchant of Asphodel. We'll gain 24 life off of that exchange, draining our opponents for 8 each. We'll then pay 2 life, sacrifice Gary, get Reanimate, pay 2 life, cast Reanimate, bring back Blood Celebrant. We'll make enough mana to be able to cast Inanimate Dead, and another spell following up. So we'll spend 6 life here to generate 2 black mana. Then we'll pay 2 life, sacrifice Blood Celebrant, we'll go get Animate Dead. We'll use one of our 2 floating black mana and 2 life to cast Animate Dead, bringing back Grey Merchant of Asphodel. And we're just going to keep going through this loop because, we have the extra mana ready for our next one. The only time where it's going to start getting interesting is if you need to start using Corpse Dance or Shallow Grave. Whenever you get to these last reanimation spells, you're going to need to make enough mana with Blood Celebrant to be able to reanimate Gary a couple of times, because you're no longer going to have access to Blood Celebrant, since Grey Merchant of Asphodel will now be the top creature card in our graveyard. But essentially, you're just going to go through this loop using your different reanimation spells, alternating either between Grey Merchant and Blood Celebrant, usually early on, so that you can gain enough life to offset the amount of life that you're losing going through this loop. But once you've gained enough life, because you have 3 opponents, 24 to 28 life each time. It's more whenever you're using the enchantments, less whenever you're using the spells. But yeah, you're just going to go through this, drain them manually with a loop of just a tutor chain using Razaketh. So one more engine that's just kind of absolutely ridiculous in this deck is Vilis plus Shieldred. Vilis has an activated ability that is black, pay 2 life, target creature gets -1/-1 till end of turn. Typically, I target Vilis or somebody's Robrak or somebody else's commander or something. If there's nothing to target, I just target Vilis and keep the targets stacked up so that they all will resolve at the same time. But essentially, because Crick's in play, I can pay 4 life to target Vilis. On the Upon paying 4 life, Vilis will draw me 4 cards. 1, 2, 3, 4 cards in my hand. And Shieldred will trigger, gaining me 8 life. So this exchange is pay 4 life, draw 4 cards, gain 8 life. So I'm netting 4 cards in my hand and 4 life. The other way that you can do this is if you don't have Crick in play and you have a Blood Celebrant, you can do this Sans Crick by using, let's just say you have a swamp available to you. This Herb Orb will suffice. So I'll tap this for a black, pay 1 life to add 1 black mana, because it's 1 mana of any color in my mana pool. So I will then trigger Vilis, drawing me 1 card because I paid 1 life, which will then trigger Shieldred, which will gain me 2 life. So I'll net 1 card, 1 life, and I still have that black mana. So that's one way that you can draw through your deck 1 card at a time, essentially, until you get to enough to be able to cast Crick. And then the other thing that's even more ridiculous is if you have all 4 of these, pay 3 life, add a black mana. So if I pay 3 life, add a black mana, I'll draw 3 cards, gain 6 life, which offsets my cost, but I'm netting 1 mana each time. And, you know, once you get into a position like this, you're, you know, just clearly going to be able to win the game because you can make as much mana as you need. The only thing you need to be careful here is if Orcish Bowmasters, and you have a Vilis in play, targets specifically you. So let's just say we start with Vilis in play, and now I'm going to try to put a Shieldred on the stack, and somebody responds with an Orcish Bowmasters targeting me. If I take that damage, Vilis will make me draw a card, which will then trigger the Orcish Bowmasters again. If they target me, it'll make me draw a card. So there's a few ways that you can like try to combat that. Really, like the main ways are just like killing your Vilis, which you won't be able to do with his activated ability because it triggers Vilis. So really, there's only like 2 things you can do here, and it's calling the weak and sacrifice, or flashing in like your own Orcish Bowmasters if you have mana. Again, you can't pay life, otherwise you're going to draw cards to be able to kill the Bowmaster in time. So one thing we can do with that scenario, you know, let's just say an opponent has an Orcish Bowmasters targeting us, going to trigger Vilis, is we can pay the additional costs of sacrifice in any order, or the cost of sacrifice and calling the weak in any order. So we can sacrifice Vilis to either one of these and pay the 2 life, which will get rid of Vilis, stopping that loop, generating us either 4 or 8 black mana that we can then try to use to, you know, further our game. So oftentimes what you'll end up doing is going through and drawing as much as you need until you perhaps hit one of these. So another way to win with Crick is going to be using Praetor's Grasp and Lion's Eye Diamond to be able to close out a game. So I'm just going to grab, you know, a handful of cards. Let's just say these are what's in our graveyard. This is what's in our hand. And, you know, I'll cast this Lion's Eye Diamond as my first spell for turn, followed by a Praetor's Grasp targeting an opponent. We'll steal their Underworld Breach, crack Lion's Eye Diamond for 3 red, cast their Underworld Breach. We will re-escape this Lion's Eye Diamond, exiling 3 cards. We will re-escape this Praetor's Grasp using our 1 floating red and some life, 4 life. And then from here we're going to take Brain Freeze, which will help fill our graveyard more. We'll crack Lion's Eye Diamond for 3 blue, and we'll use 2 of the blue on Brain Freeze targeting ourselves, which will, you know, fill our graveyard even more. I'm exaggerating here, obviously, but, you know, just giving something to illustrate. Recast Lion's Eye Diamond, exiling 3. Sack it again for 3 blue. So now we have 4 blue floating. We'll use 1 of the blue in 4 life. Cast Praetor's Grasp again. This time we're going to get Thassa's Oracle. Then we'll use the 1 blue and 2 more life. Go get Demonic Consultation. Then we'll use our 2 floating blue and our to put Thassa's Oracle on the stack, and then we'll use our ability with Crick to pay 2 life to cast Demonic Consultation, and, you know, just win the game from there. So that's Crick. Fast, explosive, and, you know, once you learn these lines, it becomes very hard for the table to really keep up with you. This deck is about converting life into mana advantage and then using that advantage to tutor repeatedly until you assemble one clean sequence that ends the game. My biggest advice if you're trying to learn this deck is really memorize the cards, what they do, and their mana value. Then you need to practice assembling win lines from random hands until your decision making really just speeds up. Mulligan puzzles are going to be your friend. I've got a playlist of sample hands and a full Moxfield primer linked in the description. And yeah, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.